a lover of organic food production. I love the system. I've been a student up here at USU for 6 years, and one of my degrees, my undergrad, is in sustainable food production. So I've worked a lot with organic. Actually, this picture right here is of the student organic farm, and it's up here in Logan. It's run by students, and we basically get to put into practice what we're learning at the college. So it was a really cool experience. I did it in 2019, and now I kind of go help people, all the managers since. One of my interns took over in the next year, and as they change hands, I kind of go over there and help them. So yeah, glad to share with you what I know. So these are the topics we're going to go over. So these are topics, basically, they're all part of a system that I used. And so as an organic producer, I had to figure out all the different parts of the system and how to deal with every aspect of organic farming. And weed control was such a huge issue in years past. Then it was an issue where basically crews would get worn out. They would be weeding so much that they just couldn't stand it anymore, and they didn't have a good experience. And so as producers or even gardeners, if you're not using herbicides or different things and doing it in an organic way, then it's going to be something you have to really keep up on and really know about so you don't get worn out. And I have a lot of people in my neighborhood. I'm kind of the neighborhood garden guy that tells people, shows people how to do all kinds of things. And that's one of the biggest things is weeds. They get worn out and say, I'm not successful. I have these weeds all over. And so I try to teach them some of these different things that they can do to control them. So we'll go all over these. I always think of this, of course, with like Nick doing IPM, doing the integrated pest management. It's a whole system. So I look at all these different topics as just parts of the system that you have to know. And so these are things that are, of course, used in USDA organic farms, because that's what the student organic farm was. We upkept the certification through that. And so first thing we have to do is basically figure out what our weeds are and then a little bit about them, so their biology. Some of the basic things we got to know is whether they're annuals, biennials, or perennials. And so if you don't know what all of them are, the annuals are just usually go through a life cycle in one single year. Our biennials are going to be ones that go in over a year, but no more than 2 years, their whole life cycle. And then a perennial is going to be one that lives over 2 years, something we have to deal with forevermore. But usually I treat an annual and a biennial in my systems as basically the same type of plants. But perennials are very different. And we'll look at the annuals versus the perennials as well. So part of the life cycle that we need to know is our germination times. When are they going to actually, these seeds out in the seed bank that exist in our field or in our gardens, we got to know when they're going to come up. We have our early spring weeds, we have grasses, we have broadleaf weeds, we have all these different weeds that are going to come in at different times. So we got to kind of know those as this system goes on. That's something we do learn over time, but we need to know. Also, we need to know when they're going to seed off. So when they're going to put out those seeds. To ensure that basically we don't let them get to that point. So there is a few things that I put up here that can help you. There's apps you can throw on your phone for plant identification. There's a lot of them, but there's actually been studies done on some of these. And some of the most accurate ones that can give you clear down to the species is picture this, but it does cost money. PlantNet. That one is actually free, and I like that one because it's free and it gets you pointed in the right direction at least. But then along with that, once we know what they are, we can go to things like this, the weed guide that's put out by University of Nevada in Reno. And it's really good. It'll give you the weed biology. It'll give you different characteristics and actually some control tactics that you can use. It's really, really good. And I'm going to put these resources, all these different websites. It's on the very last page that I'll throw up there as I answer questions too. So you'll be able to just take a picture of that or screenshot it, whatever you want to do. There's also USU has some weed things. I put one up here on bindweed because Northern Utah, I know bindweed is such an issue. That's my number one nemesis. in my production that I'm still doing, working with asparagus and other vegetables at the research farm. It's my number one, so I had to throw it up there. So first thing, know about our weeds. Our next part is basically starting the planting process. If any of you out there are USDA certified, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to have a lot of different paperwork and things that goes along with that. And one thing we do in organic is we make field maps. So this is a field map from when I was running the farm. And you can see I have all these different rows going throughout the field. So I had 12 rows, and it lays out every single type of vegetable I was growing. This is a mixed field. It has about anything you can think of, from root crops to your greens and brassicas and corn, potatoes, everything is within that. So along with mapping out where you're going to put these, you need to map out where your weeds are. This field here was about a half acre of production. And being my first year, I didn't really know where the weeds were. And so I just said, okay, I knew what they did last year, so I'm going to do a rotation, a crop rotation. And I ended up putting up here, if you look at the top where my little pointer is, this is carrots, a couple of different carrot plots here, and then beets. I found out really fast that I made a mistake by putting on the field edge, because right above it, not shown on the map, is like a riparian area with just tremendous amount of weeds from the year before. And so there was tons of weeds over here in my carrots and beets and everything. It became just a nightmare. But going down the row, I had broccoli, which were huge plants, and I didn't really have an issue with those. So that's something that I took note of. I actually took the same exact map. So if you were to make a map of whatever area you're growing in, and note where all the weeds are, know where all your issues are, your annuals versus your perennials, so then you can deal with those the next year, because they're going to creep up. That's the issue with them. They're going to come up again. It's not something that the next year it's really going to change a whole lot. A lot of weeds will come up in the air, but you're also going to have such a seed bank generally that they're going to continue to be an issue. So I've already talked about knowing our weeds, but we also need to plan on for what tools we need to use. I'm going to go over a little bit about tools later on. Really important to plan for that, because that's money. And also with whatever weeds you have, you're going to use different types of tools to deal with them. Then also your labor, because your labor costs, depending on what your weed issue is, adding to the other cost of planting and harvesting and other maintenance is a big deal, especially when we have tight profit margins. And then I like to always think of this integrated system being thresholds of weeds, not eradicating weeds. We have to allow some weeds. We can't really get around it. They're never going to go away completely. There's always going to be a source, whether it's if it's in your backyard garden and you have weeds in your lawn that move into it, if your neighbors have weeds, if you have a farm, then you're going to be getting them from outside and maybe areas that you didn't take care of as well. So we just need to keep them at economic levels, meaning they're not causing damage that takes away our profit. And then whatever system that we come up with, just like I made, it has to be manageable with the amount of money that you can put into it, and what kind of labor you can find maybe in your area. So now I want to talk some about our annuals and our perennials. Some of the differences, there's a lot of similarities between them, of course, because they're things that grow erratically and we don't get to pick. But first, our annuals, they often emerge in flushes, so in large amounts. Right now up here, I'm up here in Logan, and I have these huge flushes of kochia coming up right now. And it's like a blanket. It's like a light, kind of almost a teal color. These just huge areas that are covered in kochia. And so that's always an issue for us. I've had a flush of grass weeds. I've had a lot of bindweed already come up in different areas. So annuals, a lot of the time they come up in large amounts, which also makes them a little bit easier to control sometimes. We also, in annuals, we want to take them out when they're really small. They're really easy to take out because their roots are really small. We can basically rip the root out with the hoe and then it's gone. We can also create what's called a stale seed bed because they come up in flushes often. We can kill a large amount of them and at one time, and then we can seed into the ground and be more successful. We're going to talk about some tactics with creating a stale seed bed as well. Annuals, we want to, after we've made a stale seed beds and killed off some, we want to kind of minimize the amount of soil disturbance we have. We don't really want to do like deep tillage, rototilling around because it does bring up the weed seeds back up to the surface, a new set that we don't want. And so basically staying within the top inch or something is a pretty good rule. So our annual is a little bit easier to control, but we got to prevent their seeding because that's where they're coming from. They're not overwintering. They're always coming from the seeds. So if we can minimize the times when they seed off, then we're much better off. Our examples of them, kochia, witchgrass, and mallow. Mallow is one of my ones that I hate because it has a really, really good taproot. Hard to pull out. A lot of time you pull off the top and then it just comes back. And then pigweed and purslane, some of my nemesis that I dealt with at the Stewart Organic Farm, especially purslane. It was pretty everywhere in everything that I was dealing with. Now our perennials, they can come from seed. Definitely, especially things like bindweed. I see it come up in huge portions in seed where we've missed it in years past. And their seeds can live, of course, a very long time. But a lot of our perennials emerge from reserves that are down inside the roots. So they have fleshy roots. If anybody's dealt with Bermuda grasses down south that I used to work with, because I'm from Washington County down in the desert, then you know that they just will come up and they will go really fast because they have a lot of storage inside of those roots. So they're a lot different than our annuals because of that. They have a lot of energy to push and grow very quickly compared to our annuals. So our key is to deplete the root system. So basically, as it uses its energy to make leaves and to make vines or whatever these weeds are, whether it's a dandelion making the leaves and a bindweed making little vines, then we want to deplete it, but we want to remove that plant before it starts to flower, because at that point, it's also putting a lot more of the reserves from photosynthesis it's getting and rebuilding the root system at that time. And plus, one of the key things with the flowering is that the seeds in our perennials will be mature before we really think they are. So a lot of the time, the rule with bindweed is that when it has the flower, then basically the seeds inside, when you see that flower, you're likely to have seeds that are already viable that become an issue. So if you're to till those in or kill it, whatever, the seeds will become part of that seed bank. So we really need to keep it, be careful and know that biology, watch for those different signs when it's going to flower. And of course, perennials are a long-term issue because they keep coming up from the ground. It almost seems like they're never ending with bindweed. And I know I'm going to talk a lot about bindweed because it's so difficult to deal with in an organic system because we don't have the control of using chemicals like you do in conventional agriculture. Perennials, a lot of them are spread by tilling, especially ones that vine or have those storage roots. They break into pieces. So say one bindweed plant, if it's pretty good size, you till it up, break it into a lot of pieces and it's buried and it can become 100 plants. And so you got to be careful about not dragging it with tilling and stuff, dragging these pieces around your field. There's a little bit of difference between them. There's a lot when you look at them singly, but there's a kind of a little idea for you. So one of the things that is really key in organic production is our crop rotation. If you ever look it up in all these studies I've read and different things, then it always says that historically it's the backbone of organic weed management because it breaks up the growth cycles of the weeds. It makes it so then we can give crops a competitive advantage over those weeds. It's a long-term thing we want to look at in organic. If you're USDA certified, then you're going to be required basically to rotate and move plants from different parts of your field and move them around. It's kind of it helps in two ways though. It helps with not only our weed pressures, but our insect and disease pressures. So it's part of our yearly plan that we have to do. Now I put one example on here. And it's just a made up example because it'd be different for everybody. But in my field, my mixed vegetable field, then it was so many different plants that it's kind of endless on what I could use as a rotation. So this example here is just putting our lettuce and then 1 year and then put our tomatoes the next, then root crops, and then beans, and then another greens, broccoli. And so it's kind of like if we want to put something that's big and then smaller and then bigger and then smaller, because if you put something large in there, those weeds are likely still going to come up, but they're not going to compete as well. And a lot of those weeds end up dying back or not seeding off as much or different things. And so then you have less weeds in those areas typically. And so you can keep rotating. Now, it depends on your situation. Now, going back to this, my plan here, my map, then on these edges where I had all those weeds up here with my carrots, like I showed before, this was some knowledge that I was able to take in, and I take records of it to make sure that it can get passed on. And then so I know it. So if you're going to do this long term, you're going to need to know where these weeds are, where your issues are. And so now this field is being used actually right now in the same way. And they're actually, I made sure that when I went and consulted, talking to different people and suggesting that they put large plants, different things each year down these edges instead of putting greens or carrots and things. So then there's a competitive advantage over the top of it. So whatever you're doing, whatever your production system in, depends on your crop rotation, but it doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to make sense so it can compete with the weeds that you have. Whether you have the bindweed that's crept into an area, a lot of the time our weeds are infestations in just certain areas and not a whole field. And so as we note that, then when we do our planning, then we can take care of that issue. Now, cover crops is a great tool because in organic production, not only do we have trouble with weeds because we can't just spray them out, but it also cover crops are nice because they give us nutrients. It creates competition with weeds. And this is something we use cover crops for our fields that we plant in the fall, right after our production is done, put it in the ground using maybe a winter wheat to catch some nutrients so they don't get pushed through with the snow, and then using something like a vetch that's really short. So there's different systems, but cereal grains are really good at competing with weeds. They grow really fast. They use a lot less moisture to get germinated and get going, and work really well in the fall. And you can do layers of cover crops. So just one small example, because there's so many depending on where you're at and what you want to do. You can put down here, you can put winter wheat, which grows tall and slender, and then vetch, which is short. And so you can basically layer this and stop light from getting down into the canopy of the weeds. So it's one, not only is it nutrition for your crops that you want, but also taking care of some weed issues. Here's one publication on cover crops specifically for Utah by a bunch of the awesome extension agents and professors up here. And then there's also one here. One of the people on it, Dr. Drost, Dan Drost, who is my advisor that I've worked with for years up here in vegetable production. So this is a really good publication on using cover crops and vegetables, because a lot of the time I had some assumptions on what cover crops would be good in the system that I was using, but as I read about, I found out which ones were the very best, because there's definitely depends on where you're at and what you're trying to do. So there's a couple of good ones, and I'll put those are on a page at the very end as well, so you can have those. So here's our nutritional benefits and the different types that we can use: legumes, broadleafs, and the grasses and cereal grains. They all have different characteristics. Like I said, in this picture up here, you can see this is down in Kaysville. If you've been down there, you recognize that there's a little farm, research farm here. We have hairy vetch right here in the front, and you can see how it grows out. It kind of vines out, and it grows more horizontal and fills in and becomes really thick, versus our wheat back here that's light colored but growing taller, not as thick. So there's a lot of advantages to cover crops, and I'd really, if you're trying to control weeds but also build up your soil and give your crops what they need in organic production, then cover crops really should be part of your system. Now, this is one of the or two of the different things that you can do to create basically seed beds that are going to be way better for your plants if you're going to be direct seeding, especially into soils. So one of them, flaming, it's kind of cool. We have up here, their organic farm has a big old flamer that goes on the back of a tractor, 3-point. It's huge. You can do multiple beds at once. And basically our flaming system here, if you see in the first picture that's kind of up close, it's basically a bunch of weed burners that are pointing straight at the ground, and they're going to be just burning off germinated weeds. So if they've emerged, ones that come up and that you can physically see them, it's going to be killing them. It's not really pushing down into the soil. So keep that in mind. It's just the things right on the top. So it creates what's called the stale seed bed. So it's only killing what's on the very top, killing the things that emerged, and that's it, nothing beneath that. Now, one nice thing is that it's very targeted where you put it. You're putting your labor and your time into the most important part, which is going to be your seed bed, where you're putting that plant. So you can see this guy over here, he's putting, I don't know if that's a 2-3 foot wide bed that he has, and he's able to just kill the weeds there. You can see kind of on the side where it's thicker, these green tiny weeds there, and I'm sure that's what we can't really see very well, but there's a little bit of green. It's kind of hard to see, but he's able to just go and kill those off and then go to plant in there. But keep in mind, you don't want to disturb it a bunch after you flame, because you'll bring up more weed seeds. You also want to do them when they're small, because you want to go fairly fast over them, and they're easier to kill, because every weed has a little growth apex, and you want to be able to kill that. If you don't, and you only burn off the leaves, then it can come right back up. And it's best for annuals because they don't have that storage underneath. They're not connected to anything else. They're not connected to that root system that would pop up somewhere else. And then solarization is one that I used over at the organic farm for thistle, actually, for Canada thistle, because it was so hard to get rid of. Because Canada thistle, if you've dealt with it, it pops up in one place, and then it comes up not very far from it, and then it comes up again, and eventually you have a pretty big area with it if you don't control it, which I had trouble controlling with just hoeing off, because I cut off its head and then it just grew another one, essentially, is what happened to it. So solarization is really cool. It worked well for me. And it's basically, we're taking the heat of the sun and trapping it under plastic. And basically, if you look at this picture here, this is studies done using clear plastic and also black. They've covered the edges. You make sure you tape any tears that may be in the plastic or anything. It doesn't have to be wonderful plastic. Sometimes it's old plastics that you're using, but they need to hold that heat and not let it out, because it gets extremely hot under there, and that's what we need. So it creates what we refer to as a sterile seed bed, because it not only kills the weeds that will germinate, but it also kills, it can kill seeds, and it can kill even bacteria, soil bacteria, and fungi and different things. So it does more than just simply kill the weeds. It actually sterilizes. I can do it even several inches deep if it's nice and hot, and work really well. And with that, the soil bacteria that are good, and the fungi, these different things, they do come back fairly fast into those areas. So generally, it's not that big of an issue, because they recolonize and things pretty fast, that I've seen in literature. But it does need water to work. The heat actually travels through the water into the soil. Instead of, if it's dry, it only reaches the top couple inches, and it doesn't really hold on to the heat enough. So, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks to do this in general, in that range, depending on where you're at, what time of year. So it works best, of course, in the summer heat. So it'll get rid of, it can help germinate seeds. It can help if you're using the black plastic, like in the picture, or some kind of tarping. They actually refer to it as oculation when you do that. But usually we just refer to it as solarization. Then it'll start up for light. Bindweed, it works really well for. It's really interesting. If you've ever tried it, you've seen that when you take off the black plastic, there's bindweed that would grow up underneath it, and it's pushing all the energy from its roots, but it doesn't actually turn green. It stays yellow. and stays that way. And then when you pull it off, you can cut it off and get rid of that layer on top, and it really does beat it back. And also Canada thistle did the same thing for me. It tried to come up, couldn't get light, and so it kind of stunted and stopped that growth. And the next year there was very little issue for the next manager there. And so it is one of those things that helps long term, but you will have to do it every few years more than likely, because once again, we aren't eradicating these weeds, we're just managing them with this tool. Now there is mechanical control. That's what we're probably most familiar with. We see it, we kill it. We use different methods for it. So looking at small farm tools, because I'm assuming that most of you are on some kind of small farm, whether you call your garden a small farm, or if you have some kind of small production. I had a whole 1.5 acres of production. It was just really intense. So we have hand tools, which are different types of hose, a huge variety of them, anything you can think of, wire weeders, hula hose, different things. But my favorite tools that I used was the wheel hoe and walk behind tractors. And that's what I have the picture of. This is actually the wheel hoe in this picture is a Haas brand. It was relatively cheap. That's one reason why I bought it, but it has these tools. They may be kind of hard to see, but right here by my pointer is their hula hose or stirrup hose. Two of them in a set there. There's these cultivators on it, is some sweeps, there's plows. It's really versatile. And it kills weeds very, very quickly, really fast compared to our hand hose, and your backfill's a lot better. And then our walk behind tractors. This is an old, like 1960s walk behind tractor from the university up here that I used, and it's essentially a wheel hoe with a motorized unit on it. It's awesome. This is one of my interns that took over the next year, and it was nice. You don't break a sweat when you're using that machine. You're just following it around essentially. If you can turn it and follow behind it, you can use these kind of tools, and they have toolbars and different attachments, just like these wheel hose. But one thing with these tools, I always think about is our labor cost, what it takes to use our hand tools versus putting out a little bit of money for like these wheel hose, which can be $500 to $1,000. That one that I bought was only around $400 and something at the time. I'm sure it's more now. These walk behind tractors they're older, but if you're a little bit mechanical, you can use them and they're fine. And you can get those for a few $100s. And they're really versatile. So mechanical control is something, of course, we use a lot, but I think by using something that's faster than the old way that I grew up, just using hand tools. And we had a good acre of garden that we had to deal with, and all I had was an old flat hoe. So these tools are amazing compared to those. If you've used them before, you know exactly what I'm talking about too. There's a nice publication here that you can look at as well. It's for small acreage farms, different tools that you can use, and ones that are readily available out there. So that's also on the resources page I'll show. So I did think I ought to show you an example of what I did, a system that I created for managing weeds on beans and corn. Every single area or crop I managed differently, depending on how they grow and depending on when they're planted. So this is kind of a basic outline of it. I used this wheel hoe on the left. This is using sweeps when I did it. And these are kind of pictures just of when my corn here in the middle, and then my beans right next to it. And then later on what they look like. But essentially I tilled it up, made the seed bed, watered it so I could water the weeds, and without planting yet. Waited for like 5 days, and it was really hot, and the weeds came right up. I took the wheel hoe with these sweeps and went over it really shallow as I possibly could. And then I planted. It was nice and hot, so it was perfect time to plant those. So I planted it. Once my crops came up, when they were even smaller than in the picture, then that's when I took through the wheel hoe down it again. But one thing that was cool about this one that I had purchased is it has this arc here, and I can spread this out and put these sweeps and different things and point them to the outside. and straddle down my corn, straddle down the beans, and knock out the weeds really fast. I could go this 300-foot row, clear down there's about 300 feet, and I could do that in just a matter of minutes, going down and then spinning around and coming right back up. And I could do a whole entire bed in just like 10 minutes. But then I had to go back. We had to go back and use a hand hoe in between where we could, especially on the corn, pull some, and then wheel hoe one more time. And that was all I did for a whole season. And so it was a great system. These tools are so fast compared to anything else you could get out there. And in these really tight spaces where in between these rows here, I only have about 18 inches. So that's really small. I can't get a machine. The walk behind tractor, I wasn't able to even get inside of here. And then you see these pictures, seeing how thick they are. They've outcompeted the weeds. Whatever weeds are there aren't going to cause me any economic problems. They're not going to decrease my yield. Now, this picture is actually, I watered my corn and then a huge windstorm blew a section of it over. We tipped it back up and propped it up with some twine and things. But I thought this was good because you can see down around it, there's really no weeds to speak of. Down here, the corn outcompeted it. So it really does work. I think coming up with a system for whatever you're doing, whatever tools you have and labor you have is such a good thing. And I think these, maybe if you can do small purchases every year on these kind of things is to make a big difference in production. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, since we're about out of time too, is about prevention. I always say we don't have to take care of the weeds that we can prevent, but it also has a cost, of course, because it's methodical. We have to be about it. So I think the number one thing to prevent weeds is to make sure we have clean or basically weed-free inputs. When we're bringing mulches, compost and manures, if we're bringing straw in, manures, make sure they're composted manures. At one time in my own garden, I had a huge garden and in my first house, and I brought in some manure from a guy that gave it to me, and it was just steer manure from some 4-H cows that they had, and they were off of the Arizona Strip between Arizona and Utah, clear down there in the desert. And when I got it, I got the most amazing weeds. I had never seen them before. I don't even know what they were. These amazing vines that would grow up in with my beans. Couldn't even tell the difference in them hardly. And they just went all over my garden. It was awful. And so I had a whole new set of weeds to deal with. So it really needs to be clean. Our water source needs to be clean as well. If you're using overhead irrigation, it's more of an issue because it sprays out through some of the heads. At the student farm, I switched everything to drip irrigation and we filtered it. And so weed seeds weren't pushing through those. Need to make sure we get rid of the weeds that are seeding off. If you're doing really well using drip and different things, then maybe it's just kind of a whack-a-mole thing. You're pulling out ones that have seed heads, the ones that get away from you as you're going around. If you're doing organic farming, then that you're constantly looking for pests, scouting for pests and different things. So you're having to walk around anyway, and you can pull those out pretty easy and chuck them, get them off the farm. Mulching, using plastic mulches is my favorite thing. There's straw and there's newspaper and different things, but plastic mulch works so well to prevent weeds from coming up around your crop. In this picture on the left, this is a squash, this little seedling. We just planted direct seeded squash into here. We only had to weed once around it, and then it got so big so fast that we didn't have to deal with that anymore. So it works so good. The middle picture is looking at our build edges or our perimeters. Here we have a grass edge that I managed and kept it really strong and made it so this basically orchard grass wouldn't have weeds in it. There's also some elderberries and raspberries and things along here. So we kept it really strong, and so the weeds didn't creep in, and so they wouldn't move back into the farm and become a source of weeds. And then over here on this picture, to the right, this is a mixture. We have plastic mulch. This is in a tunnel setting, but you can do it in any small area on your farm. There's plastic mulch down the middle. This is tomatoes, and I have peppers here. I'm using landscape fabric down the middle. And basically in here, the weeds that came up, we just did the whack-a-mole and just pulled them out. Some of the bigger weeds that were seeding off. Other than that, we didn't really have to have to weed it all inside of our tunnel. It was really, really nice. And this is something you can leave out in the field and then have just open soil. You don't have to use plastic mulch or something, but just put it on these edges so you're only managing portions of it. Once again, it's one of those balances between labor and the cost of the different things. If you get really good landscape fabric, the really thick plastic type, then it lasts for several years. So looks like I'm out of time, and but just want to reiterate that this is a whole big systems approach that we're looking at. So what I went over is really the whole entire system that was required in order to take care of the weeds on the farm, and it's something that I was successful with, and you know, figure it out for yourself, research them more, and apply them to yours. I got a couple cartoons for you because I love these little cartoons. Glad the artists like to make them for us because I enjoy them very much. So with that, I also have, I'll leave this up here, the resources page. So if you want to